Welcome to our February Trust Board meeting. It only seems like last week when we had a board meeting, but it's obviously it's not. Our meeting in January was a little bit later on in the month, so this has come around quite quickly. And as we have done for the last 2 or 3 years, our board meetings in the last quarter of the year over the winter are every month, so that we can keep a good oversight of how things are going through the winter and our winter plan. Even more important this year while we're tackling the coronavirus. I don't think I've got to welcome anybody else on the meeting, except that we will have some of our senior managers who are listening into the meeting, and they'll have an opportunity to ask questions when we get to the stage of the agenda where we ask for questions. If any of our senior managers that are linked in would like to ask a question, they just need to raise their hand. We'll try and answer the question during the meeting, but if we can't, you'll get a written response. So when we get to that, I'll ask for questions. I don't think we've had any apologies, have we, Karen?
No apologies, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Yes, Chair, I have. So item 26. Which says shaping the people profession, page 9. There's a reference to external partners, EY. Just wish to draw the attention of the meeting that a member of my family works in their health consultancy.
Okay, thank you very much, VJ. If there are no further declarations of interest, can we approve the minutes of the meeting in January, which was circulated with the agenda? Has anybody identified any amendments? Karen?
Yes, there's a reference to Nicola's first name. It's spelt incorrectly on one occasion in the minutes. So if I could correct those, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. OK, so if there are no further amendments, are we happy to approve these as a correct record? Thanks, Stuart. Thank you. OK, and then we've got a very short action log, and there are no outstanding actions, which is perfect. OK, so this is the part of the agenda where we go to questions from the public relating to items that we're going to be discussing this morning. We've had no written questions submitted, so if any of our senior manager colleagues that are on the Teams meeting would like to ask a question, now's the opportunity to do that. And what I would ask you to do is to raise your hand, and hopefully somebody will be able to see people's hands raised. I can't see any. No. OK, great. So there are no questions relating to the agenda. We'll get straight on with the Chief Exec's report and go straight over to Richard.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all well. I'm not going to go through the paper. I'm going to assume it's been read by colleagues, and in a couple of moments I'll hand over to Ben to give an update from an operations perspective since the paper was written and on a January position. And I know exec colleagues would like to add a couple of comments. Before I do so, if it's okay with yourself, I've just got a couple of examples I'd like to share. Now,
Richard, just before you do that, can I just remind colleagues to put themselves on mute if they're not speaking, because there's a little bit of background noise we're picking up. Thank you. That's
perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks, Pauline. Yeah, so when we had the last board meeting, and quite rightly Pauline described, it doesn't feel like it's indeed long ago, and it certainly wasn't, but a lot's happening in the certainly in the NHS at the moment, and indeed in society. And who would have thought, since we last met, to throw in some additional challenges into the mix? We had some severe weather, which came over the course of a weekend. And having said that, we're in a place at the moment where we're also experiencing yet again some snow in parts of the patch, which will invariably test us further. But a few examples I just want to sort of bring to board members' attention with what colleagues are doing day in and day out, and how people are going above and beyond to support frontline delivery. And the day when all the snow hit, we had multiple examples of where colleagues from both EOC and frontline operations were driving around in their own vehicles to collect staff who were stuck, who couldn't get out of their home addresses, and certainly couldn't get to their normal place of work. And we had people who were going above and beyond and collecting people and making sure that they could come back to or get into the workplace to undertake their duties. And we had absolutely no impact on our service delivery, where we were able to make sure we had people in the control room to deal with the 999 calls and dispatching of vehicles and members of the CAP team. We had frontline staff who were able to get into work as a result of their own colleagues supporting them, which is absolutely fantastic. I think it's also, Pauline, if I may, it's just worth mentioning that in other directorates and other departments of the organisation, given the challenges that we face, people are continuing to go in there above and beyond. And a great example of that would be within Nicola's directorate from an IPC perspective, where the tests and the challenges as a result of the pandemic are really sort of stretching our ability to be able to make sure that we can not only respond to all the asks and the needs, but making sure we can give specialist advice and expertise across the organisation from within our teams. Many of those colleagues are working 7 days a week. They're working hours around the clock to be able to support frontline delivery and adapting to the ever-facing challenges. We've got numerous colleagues at the moment who are involved in the vaccination programme, who are working again across the whole course of the weeks to make sure that we can vaccinate as many as our staff as possible. And I'm pleased to say that programme is working very effectively, and no doubt we'll have some further updates this morning. Again, another area would be around from the HR director, around when we talk about well-being and welfare support for staff. Yeah, again, colleagues are providing a massive amount of support for staff. Again, not through what we describe as traditional hours of work or hours of operation, where people, the pandemic we face, people are increasingly becoming under lots of pressure, where there's a complete crossover between their kind of professional and personal lives, and sometimes there's an intertwining of challenges which have an impact on them in many different ways. And there's multiple examples of where our HR colleagues and teams have gone and supported. One specific example, which was great to hear, was around how somebody went out to collect somebody's prescription, where they weren't able to do that themselves, just to make sure that they have the right correct medication for them, which it was great to hear. Just if I may, just another one, and we all know of the sad experience we had recently with the funeral of one of our members of staff, and again we had colleagues within the organisation who went above and beyond to make sure that we know our staff were unable to pay their respects in the normal way, and that's something which was extremely sad and very distressing for many people. But we had staff who made sure that they could deliver a large screen to one of the ambulance stations, so that our colleagues could pay their respects in a social distance way in that environment, rather than being able to pay their respects as they would have liked to normally. So yeah, again, a massive thank you to all colleagues involved. I could really go on, and I'm sure there's multiple examples I could continue to share, Pauline, but I think it's just a really keen to give examples of where many people across the organisation are doing things day in and day out to support ultimately our drive for patient care, and that's something I'm immensely grateful and appreciative of, and I know that's shared by the wider executive and board. So,
thanks, Richard. I think just on that last point, I do believe that there's a funeral of a colleague that retired taking place today. Is that right, Mel?
That is correct. That's correct.
It would be. I think it would be a nice thing for us to do if at 11 o'clock, I think when the funeral's due to take place, we stopped the meeting and just paused for a minute. And Karen, can I rely on you to help us with that when we get to 11 o'clock, just to remind us that we'll stop.
Pauline.
Hello.
Sorry, the service actually starts at 10 o'clock,
okay,
but it's running 10 till 11. So the family, I spoke to them yesterday and said that during that time we would think about them as an organisation. So I believe that any time during that hour would be a good time to do that.
Okay. Remind me, Karen, won't you, when we get to a good time?
Yeah, I will.
To take a pause for a minute. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Mel. And thank you for sharing those examples, Richard. I'm sure it makes us all feel very proud of our colleagues. Okay.
So if it's okay, we'll hand over to Ben just for an operational update, and then we'll take questions on the Chief Exec paper after that point.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Yeah, just a quick follow on for that. January has been a real challenging month, certainly from the 10th onwards. Definitely our hardest month in terms of service delivery since the pandemic started back in March, April last year. And I'll try and highlight how it sort of shifted as we went through the month in terms of activity and resourcing, the pressures that hit us during the month. And then on top of that, we had the usual stuff you'd expect in winter, so snow, the rain, the floods, just added more complexity to the situation we're dealing with. So I'll run through in the usual order. I'll do activity first. So activity in January was actually our busiest month of the year so far. We're responding to 2021 responses on average per day. When you compare that to our activity plan, that's 1.2% up on our activity plan. This is all unvalidated, by the way, but so 1.2 on activity, but on last year's January activity, it was 2.7% up on a straight year-to-year comparison. But probably more telling was the difference between the activity we were facing in the wave one of the first lockdown we had. So on average, we were responding to 157 more jobs a day in January than we were in April, May during the first lockdown. So busiest month so far. And the other thing we started to see, and that wasn't January, it's probably sort of November, December time, is we were seeing the proportion of our work shift from an out of hours to more in hours. So 10, 11 o'clock in the morning will be becoming our busiest hours. And we've done some more digging in that. And what's standing out is 111 activity. They have stopped being an out of hours provider, moving much more into an in hours provider. And when we spoke to 111 DHU about this, they've seen exactly the same. So they're seeing far more calls in hours now than they are traditionally in the out of hours period. And that could be linked to the lockdown, more people at home during those hours. And in terms of activity through COVID, 10% of our activity came through Card 36, which is the pandemic protocol. And that shifted from around 8% in December to 10% in January. In terms of resourcing, first month we've reported where we put less hours out than the same month last year. So January 2020 compared to January 21, we put 610 fewer DCA hours out. So not a huge amount, but still fewer than, and we haven't been reporting that at all during the previous month. And just to, as I said, break that down into the two sort of halves of the month. At the start of the month, we were putting out about 37,500 DCA hours out a week. That dropped to the last couple of weeks to 35,500 hours a week. And the reason for that was our abstraction, mainly around COVID related. So on the 13th of the month, we peaked at 394 colleagues off for COVID related absences. And on top of that, we had 232 people off sick. So a huge amount of abstraction that we were dealing with, which impacted on our resourcing. Glad to report that we have seen that on a downward trend now. And as of yesterday morning, we'd reduced to 203 off with COVID. So a big drop, nearly half a drop in terms of COVID related. But our sickness is still about 260, so gone up from where we were in the middle of the month. And what we have seen in particular is COVID, people who are testing positive for COVID aren't being able to return necessarily after the 10 days. They're going sick after the 10 days because it's taking them longer to recover. And that plays out in our code around infectious disease, where we've got 80 people off coded with infectious disease, and compared to last year, we had three people. So we're still working through all that, but it's thankfully, as I said, on a downward trajectory in terms of the COVID-related absences. Hospitals, we lost just short of 7,000 hours in January, 6,800, and that's 4,000 fewer than January 2020. However, as been reporting all the way through the year, that's on a backdrop of 12% reduction in attendances at A&E. So we did 5,400 fewer attendances in January this year than we did last. In terms of post handover times, pretty much the same as January last year, 270 more hours across the month more, but not much of a shift there. Finally, around conveyance, so just alluded to conveyance there. So hear and treat in January was 10.2%. That's up from 8.7 January 2020. See and treat was 34%. That's up from 25% January 2020. So that meant our conveyance was 55% compared to 65% conveyance in January 2020. And of that, to an ED was only 49.8% was conveyed to an ED. Everything else was conveyed to an alternative. So in terms of performance, what that meant for the month of January was our Cat 1 was 7 minutes 43 and 13:37 for the 90th. So still met the national standard for the 90th. Our pressure really played out in Category 2 and Category 3. So our mean for Category 2 was 29 minutes 55 and 1 hour and 1 minute on the 90th. And the 90th for Cat 3 was 3 hours 57. And again, just to put that into context, what we saw from the 2 halves of the month was the first half of the month, we were reporting a 7 minute 20 second mean and a 25-minute mean on Cat 2. So you can see the difference in the pressure that came on in the latter half of the month. And alongside that, the acuity of the work was shifted as well. So in the start of the month, we were seeing around 63% of our work was Category 2. In the latter half of the month, it was 65.5% was Cat 2. So we saw more work shifted into Category 2. So I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Ben. Any questions for Ben on the update or on performance? Will Pope, and then VJ, and then Stuart.
Well, good morning, all, and thank you very much, Pauline. I'll put my camera on, Pauline. If the signal drops down, I'll have to turn it. I'll turn it off again.
Okay.
And apologies, Ben, if I should know the answer to this, and I'm sure you'll tell me if I should. I'm thinking of the time on scene and the non-conveyancing, and those non-conveyancing to ED numbers are great, aren't they?
Yeah.
But is that increasing our time on scene for non-conveyancing, and does the human resource modelling we've got account for increased time on scene appropriately, if indeed that's happening? And then I wonder if that is how that impacts in terms of performance. Thank you.
Yes, so we have seen an increase in our on-scene times for non-conveyed and for conveyed patients, actually, and that's something that's part of our efficiency programme moving forward to understand the implications of the workforce and the implications on our on delivery of the national standard. So in terms of for non-conveyed patients, compared to the earlier part of the year when lockdown 1, on-scene times are 4 minutes longer than they were in April, May time. And we're actually doing some work now with ORH around what the impact of that is, and we're getting their tool, their modelling software that'll mean in-house we can make that scenario planning to enable us to plan the workforce around that.
Thank you, Ben. VJ.
Thank you, Pauline. My question is actually for Nicola in terms of the update for the COVID outbreak, please. What's the latest situation?
Yeah, thank you. So we are currently managing 11 outbreaks across the whole of the organisation. They are at varying degrees of development. So I think 4 of those, let me just check my notes because I anticipated this question. 4 areas are rated what we would call green. So that means it's been longer than 11 days since the last positive case in that area. You can't actually officially close an outbreak at the moment until there's been 28 days clear of a positive result. So we are keeping those areas under surveillance, as you would expect, and making sure that we're continuing with all the mitigations that we've put in place. But those are outbreaks that have been brought under control. We have one area that is amber, which means that basically there's not been a positive case for between 8 and 11 days. So again, we keep that under surveillance. We actually have 6 areas that are RAG rated, as you would say, red, and that means that it's been less than 8 days since they've had their last positive case. Now, some of those are on 6 or 7 days. We have a couple of areas that are on 2 or 3 days, so very much under active surveillance. All of the mitigations that you would expect are in place, so enhanced cleaning, observation of compliance with IPC precautions and PPE, and daily outbreak meetings take place in those areas.
Thank you. I was thinking particularly of the EOCs.
The EOCs are both within the areas that are defined as green at the moment, so we seem to have brought those areas under control.
Thank you.
And just for some sort of additional assurance, we've introduced now, because we were obviously getting quite a lot of interest from external parties, we've introduced now weekly assurance meetings. So on a Wednesday afternoon, we meet with our senior PHE colleagues, commissioners, NHS England and Improvement. We've actually recently invited a trade union representative to join that meeting as well, where we discuss all of the areas that we're monitoring, what actions we're taking, and that's an opportunity for our external partners to gain assurance, but also to do a bit of confirm and challenge. And I'm pleased to say that in the meeting last week, they were very happy with the actions that we're taking, and when we asked them if there was anything else they thought we ought to be doing, there was nothing that they identified that we weren't already doing. So that's positive, I think.
Thank you, Nicola. Just before I go to Stuart, could you just, on the same point, could I just ask, in those outbreaks, have we got any colleagues that are seriously ill with COVID?
No. And a lot of what we've picked up, one of the mitigations that we've done is the pre-shift lateral flow testing. And actually what we're finding is a lot of asymptomatic staff, and we think that's one of the measures that has really helped us to bring these outbreaks under control quickly, because had we not done that and we'd relied just on the twice weekly testing, the likelihood is that some of those individuals would have been in the workplace, not symptomatic, but obviously infectious. So that has really, really helped with that.
Right.
But we do, part of our outbreak management is also making sure that we put in appropriate welfare and follow up for those staff. So exactly as Richard said in his update, if there's people that live on their own, making sure that they're getting a daily phone call, making sure that if they haven't got anybody else to do things like shopping for them, that we can make arrangements so that their welfare is taken care of.
Thanks very much, Nicola. Stuart, and then Perminda, and did I see somebody else's hand?
Gary Brown.
Gary, yeah.
Thanks, Pauline. A question, and also a slight follow-up on Will's question. But the question was, Ben, probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think it was possibly at QGC, I forget which meeting, there'd been a number of specific days when the hospital handover performance was particularly bad. So whilst the overall average was, as you've declared, there were particular challenges, and I wonder if that pattern had continued or not. And then just a follow-up to make sure my brain's wired the right way on Will Pope's question. Fully understand the maths and the need to understand on-scene time averages and so forth, but I'm still right in logging in my simplistic brain that on-scene time for a see and treat is almost bound to be quicker than taking them to an ED, because you've not got the travel and the waiting time. In other words, it's not an issue that we're putting more people into hear and treat. It's actually likely to be a net saving of time as well as the right clinical thing to do.
Correct. Yeah. So the net impact is created by, even if you, unless your on-scene times go up by 30-40 minutes, then yes, it's going to be a net impact. In terms of your first question, yes, we did see them. Sporadic days where we had higher challenges at the hospitals, and what we also saw, it was across more hospitals than our traditional ones. We saw it go out across most of the region on the bad days, and I think one of my concerns around this moving forward and looking forward is we're back in a situation where a lot of the hospitals have turned a lot of things off because of the situation they find themselves in. Those services are going to have to start up again at some point. and what does that mean on the impact on us further downstream. So it's really important that when our teams are involved in the system calls, we're involved in those conversations about the impact it could have on us when those services start up again, because they have to start them up again, but we need to be cautious on what impact that has on us from a handover point, because we saw that after lockdown 1, when everything started to come back to life again, we start to see our handovers certainly increase. So something for us to watch and make sure we're feeding in.
Thank you. Leon, did you want to come in on the point about on-scene times?
Yeah, I did, and I know everybody's aware of this, but obviously where we discharge at scene, there is an IP&C requirement to clean the ambulance or equipment ready for the next patient actually outside the patient's home, because we're not at the hospital utilising the cleaning services there. And my other comment would be obviously not conveying so many with a technician workforce alongside our paramedics. They obviously can't discharge safely at scene without making a call to a registered clinician in order to discharge. So all of that will add a little bit of time on scene in order to avoid the 4,500 less trips to hospital in January, Stuart. However, as you know, we're doing a piece of work on safe discharge at scene in order to discharging more on scene. We've obviously got that work stream in the clinical operating model to try and reassure that we're doing that in a safe manner.
Thanks, Leon. As you probably guessed, that's sort of part of the context for asking the question and getting it explicit, if you like. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Perminder. Perminder, can you hear me? Did you have it? Yeah. Are you taking your hand down, Perminder? I think we've lost.
We
may have lost
technical issues.
Yeah, we'll come back to you. Gary, did you have your hand up, or have we lost you?
I did. I've withdrawn the question because somebody else has already asked it for me.
Okay, great. Okay. Are there any other questions on any aspects of the Chief Executive's report and the IBR? Will?
Yeah, thanks, Pauline, and thanks to Stuart, Leon, for those clarifications, and Ben, of course, really helpful on the time on scene stuff. Quick question, if I may, about the issue on patient experience, and I see the in Richard's report, obviously the proposed extension to 60 days. I was wondering, Pauline, if that is a simple, I know nothing's simple in this world, if that was a simple human resource issue, could we put extra, even if it was only temporary, could we recruit extra resource and keep the performance level to the 30 days rather than extending the to the 60 days?
I think that's a question for Nicola.
It is indeed. I think it always sounds really easy to get additional resource in. And actually, I don't think it's as easy as that in reality, because if we want to maintain the quality of what we do, we would need to do significant training of those individuals. And that would be additional activity that the existing reduced capacity that I have would have to manage. So I think whilst it's always an option to us, I don't think it's always as easy as it might sound in reality, and actually can place additional pressure on a team who are already under significant pressure. I'd perhaps also like to remind everybody that we have been offered the opportunity to completely pause our investigations, and many organisations have taken that route. I felt very strongly, and was supported by my executive and board colleagues, that that wasn't a route that we wanted to take, that we wanted to continue as far as we could to manage that patient experience activity. But this, I think, is a pragmatic solution to not being able to meet the usual standards that we do, but whilst we can still make sure that absolutely those cases are all getting acknowledged, absolutely, we're triaging them to make sure that if there's anything in there that ought to be escalated to more of a patient safety incident investigation, that we're able to do that, and managing patients' expectations within that time. We do know that once other organisations who have exercised the pause resume activity, we are likely to see significant activity coming our way. So that may well be something that I will look to plan to and look at how we can utilise additional resource. But I think I would just go on to say that you know, whilst it sounds like a really easy solution, it actually isn't, and can place quite a significant additional burden on those individuals who are trying to keep things ticking over.
Thank you, Nicola. Nicola, you're saying in the report that you're going to keep that under review. When will you be looking at it again?
We look at it on a sort of weekly to monthly basis. So obviously we're monitoring the activity daily. Kelly meets with the team on a weekly basis to oversee activity, and she will alert to me if she feels that we need to change that position at any point. So yeah, it's something that we through our senior leadership team monthly meetings will review the activity across all of the teams, use the resources that we have flexibly across those teams. But yeah, we're keeping a very close eye on it. I did actually have my hand up just to correct something in the IBR, if I may, before you move.
Yeah,
just in case anybody's going to ask a question about it.
Sorry, just before you do, on the question of the PALS timeline, can I just ask what the required standard is, or expected standard in that domain?
Yeah, there isn't one, and it's very different across the different services. We did do some benchmarking to make sure that we weren't being completely unreasonable. As you would expect, it's a mixed bag across the ambulance services, with some of them having exercised the pause, most of them not. But some of them have response times, even in normal situations, of between 60 and 90 days. We felt that 90 days was too far, and we wanted to try and maintain 60 days. But yeah, there isn't a set standard as such.
That's helpful.
Thank you. Nicola, you were going to correct an issue in the IBR, and then I think Will Legg also wants to make a slight amendment, verbal update. So over to you, Nicola, first.
Yeah, the one for me was around IR1s per 1,000 incidents, and you'll see that it looks like we've had a massive hike in December. We usually run around between 6 and 7. And it's gone up to 13 according to the IBR. I didn't recognise that figure when I saw it, so I have done some digging and had a look, and it is actually nearer the 6 incidents per 1,000 incidents. So that will be corrected for next time, but we haven't seen a massive hike. I hope that's reassuring. Thank you.
So was that a technical error then?
I believe so. I've let Faye know. I don't know how it happened, but I've given her the correct data so that it can be corrected in future iterations.
Thank you, Nicola. Will, do you want to give your slight amendment? And then I think we've got a question from VJ.
Thanks very much.
As well, I think.
Thanks very much, Pauline. Yeah, mine is just presentational. So on metric E5, which is Roscoe Hospital, the eagle-eyed will have spotted that December 20 we managed to do 1,445.5%, which I think we'd all be very happy with if only it was true. It's actually 14.45, so it's a formatting issue. And again, the same formatting issue applies on survival to discharge. So that's E7, and that's the 2021 year to date. That should be 5.35%, as the decimal place in the wrong place. So apologies for that. Will be corrected for the next one.
I think is somebody talking in the background. If you're not, we can hear some conversation. So again, I would ask you to put yourselves on mute if you haven't done. Thank you. I don't know who it is, but we're picking up a conversation in the background. Okay. Thank you for that, Will. Those will be corrected in the minutes of the meeting. I don't think we need to circulate a correction outside that. Thank you. Kerry, I think you wanted to ask a question or make a comment, and then VJ.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before we close on the Chief Executive's report, I wanted to draw attention to board members to the national piece of work around shaping the people profession, so the future of HR and OD in the NHS. And just really, whilst I'm not going to go through the detail of this because it's set out within the Chief Executive's report, just to encourage you to log in, join that big conversation, share your views, share your aspirations in terms of what the people profession needs to look like, and share your ideas. And that's really important that we have the contributions of board members, of leaders, of staff, as well as members of the HR and OD profession. So that's all I wanted, just to encourage you to do that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Kerry. Just before I go to VJ, I actually got a question about that and that piece of work that's happening nationally. And are you aware of what the outputs are from that? What are they expecting nationally, this piece of work to achieve?
Essentially, some recommendations in terms of how we shift the focus on the people profession within organisations to look at spend more time and more focus on the transformational elements in terms of staff experience, staff engagement, staff well-being, equality and diversity, talent management. All of those things really would be my personal expectation out of this piece of work, and less of a focus on some of the transactional elements. Whilst the transactional stuff still has to happen, it's about how organisations can make that happen, utilising leaders and managers more effectively and enabling HR to focus on those transformational elements, but also drawing upon how do we maximise technology within all of this to really reshape that people profession. So I would expect that there would be some national recommendations that then locally organisations would look at taking forward to look at how do they transform, therefore, within their services.
Thanks very much, Kerry. VJ, I think you've got a question?
Thank you, Pauline. So my question is around mutual support. Is that still being sought and offered? I saw something in the paper over the weekend regarding, if I'm not mistaken, NWS. I don't know whether we were called upon to support them or anyone else for that matter.
Thank you.
Do you want to take that, Richard?
Yeah, VJ, just in relation to mutual support, we've provided a lot of support to other ambulance services, specifically around call handling. So it was in the media around providing support to the Scottish Ambulance Service. We've also provided quite a significant amount of support to Yorkshire Ambulance Service and the London Ambulance Service, and we'll continue to, on a national basis, react to any ask there. We ourselves haven't been requiring specifically the support of other ambulance services to date, but again, we will continue to keep that under review. Other than the sort of the border areas where we tend to operate, if there's a call close to another community where we would respond on behalf of each other's organisations. We've not been specifically giving any mutual aid in the form of ambulance cover to any other area.
Thanks, Richard. Just on that point, before we go to Will, I think the board need to acknowledge actually that the extra pressure that puts on our own EOCs and the tremendous pride we should have in the way that our EOC colleagues have responded to that challenge to support their colleagues, and how difficult and stressful it can be for a call taker who's dealing with a call in another part of the country, and they may need to stay on that call for some time. So it's an added pressure that they really have risen to the challenge well, and we're really, really grateful and proud of our colleagues for being able to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline.
Will Pope.
Thank you, Pauline. Last question. Thank you, Pauline. Last question from me, I think. I'm just looking at the hand hygiene and PPE data, and I realise it's early days, but we thank you to everybody for the 100% compliance on hand hygiene, which I know we'd all expect, but nevertheless, it's so easy to make a mistake when well, we know what it's like, don't we, in the real world. So well done, everybody, for the 100% there on hand hygiene. But my question is around particularly the social distance PPE has improved to 91%, but the level 2 PPE has taken a small dip, albeit it's early days. And I wonder if there's any reflection on what we can do to increase that percentage compliance.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yes, like you, we're disappointed to see that dip, but and we've been talking about this a lot through executive team. I think one of our reflections is that, you know, it is now a year on. I think there is potentially an element of fatigue amongst our staff, and I think, you know, I'd preface that by saying the majority of our staff are absolutely complying with the guidance, and as you said, in terms of the 100% for hand hygiene, I think we have to acknowledge and congratulate that. I do think there's an element of fatigue building in now. There's also potentially, I think, an element of complacency, and we've been having discussions about, you know, has the fact that this has coincided with the rollout of the first vaccination doses had an impact. Are people perhaps feeling a little safer than they were previously? In terms of what we need to do about that, I think this is one of those examples where you can't communicate and you can't educate enough. So our stance has very much been around reinforcing those messages, being really clear that the vaccine does not mean that there need to be any changes to current guidance in terms of PPE and indeed all of the infection prevention and control precautions. We are widening out the use of the rapid improvement tool, so we're getting more and more eyes on now, so that that can be monitored and we can react quickly if there are pockets of any issues. We do targeted training where that's been identified, and we've done a lot of that through the management of the outbreaks. My team, who up until now have not been going out and doing a huge number of assurance visits because of the fact that we've been in lockdown and that hasn't been deemed to be appropriate, are now getting out and about. Helen, by nature of the fact that she's out supporting all of the vaccination sites, is taking the opportunity to get out there and do assurance visits and opportunistic teaching. We've also had, myself and Tracy attended trade union comms a couple of weeks ago to discuss this very issue and to seek support from our trade union colleagues in terms of how we can reinforce and get this message out there. We are planning a conversation cafe for the 9th of February, which will focus on infection prevention and control. I'll be hosting that, and it will be attended by Liz Hoyle, our new head of infection prevention and control, and we can share from that some of the learning that we've had through our investigation of our outbreaks. But I do think, you know, we just need to keep reinforcing that message whilst recognising that, you know, our staff are tired and fatigued.
Thank you, Nicola. Ben, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it's just to add on top of that, I think the key to it is positively challenging when people see it at the time.
Yeah.
I think it's too late if we report it to a manager to go and talk to that member. It's too late then. What we've got to do is people feel comfortable to positively engage with staff at that time, whoever they are, to make sure we're getting the consistent message across around level 2 PPE. So on top of what Nicola said, it's about that, giving people the confidence and to make that challenge as and when they see it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Ben. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the Chief Executive's report? I've got a question really for Mike, and it's around there's a piece in the report on the finance, which I don't quite understand, about the payment that's going to be reclaimed in April.
Yes.
Right. I'm sure these people on the FPC understand that, but I don't quite get it.
Yeah, so if you remember, well, maybe some may or may not remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, what the Department of Health in liaison with the Treasury wanted to do is to make certain suppliers to the NHS were paid promptly to ensure the supply chain kept going. So every trust was given a month's extra payment in April. So we got the next month's payment in April. That will be rectified in March. So in March we won't get any payment at all. So for us, that's about £20 million we won't get. But given we've got £40 million in the bank, it's not an issue. However, for some trusts, that will cause problems, and the Department of Health are dealing with those trusts separately, because what they want to do is ensure we still keep the money flowing around the system and the supply chain stays intact.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I understand that now. Thank you very much, Mike. And I've just got one question for Ben, and it's around the fantastic work that our colleagues have done to reduce conveyance to A&E departments and increase non-conveyance. And we've seen that more or less now throughout this year. Would you say that that's now sustainable and that we've embedded that change of practice?
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a step change, Pauline, and I think it's embedded, and I think seeing good practice across all our divisions, and Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, who have the non-conveyance leads, that's really helped. Are we in a false position in January? Probably, because we saw that in April as well, with the high, when you get really high levels of COVID-related calls. Yeah. But I don't envisage us returning to the sort of 65% we were this time last year. No.
Great, that's brilliant. That's fantastic progress. Karen.
Excuse me, it was just on that point really, because obviously in all the various meetings we're picking this up, Ben, but I would assume that will get better, not worse, in terms of the specialist practitioner role, which I'm sure has had a strong influence on that as well.
Absolutely, and as we roll the next cohort of that out, that will support that as well. When we get to the magical number, that will still only be 60 operational. So it won't have a massive impact on the overall trust, but it certainly will help, Karen. And not only that, it's about the message as well. It's a positive message. They can support colleagues around that cultural shift, around doing the right thing. So I think it's a two-pronged attack from the specialist practitioners around their actual work, but also supporting their colleagues in confidence in doing the right thing for the patient.
And I guess in addition to that, working in partnership with the IPC, we're gonna see quite an improvement as well, aren't we, across the board?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I think Leon, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, very quickly, just reinforcing Ben's message. Yeah, as the staffing goes up, there'll be 10 SPs on duty 24/7 with one in the control room. And I think the other impact we're seeing, Karen, is our own crews asking to refer to an SP in order to leave the patient at home. And that's a really big shift. Rather than taking the patient somewhere to leave them at home, internal referral from all of our staff to SPs is having a big impact. If we multiply that up over the next couple of months, that could be really interesting to monitor as well.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no further questions or comments on the Chief Executive report, we've heard a really good update from Ben on the situation in January, which has been our most challenging period so far in the pandemic. It's good to hear that staff that have been affected by COVID are beginning to return to work, and those numbers are coming down. And fantastic progress around non-conveyance, which has now been embedded with across the organisation. And a plea really to all our colleagues around PPE. Please, please, please wear your PPE appropriately at the right time, every time, and have the confidence to challenge your colleagues if they're not. That's the best way to protect yourselves, your family, patients, and reduce the number of outbreaks. Okay, so I think if we can move straight on to the next section, and we've got the quality assurance, we've got the Quality and Governance Committee record of business for assurance. Is there anything to add, Stuart?
Yes, I'll put my hand down as you just asked me. Just a couple of things really. But it's in the record of business. I think it's worth putting on our minutes. The committee was very firmly disappointed that at last, well, pleased that at last we have some national work looking at hospital handovers, but displeased that it doesn't include the knock-on effect of handovers to the general community. Nicola was very clear that our own internal work will continue to monitor that impact. And as a small plea, I just hope when we get to the stage of having ICSs more involved in what actually happens to their system overall, that the more holistic approach is taken. And the second thing was just a couple of, I guess, positive touches. We've had a good debate this morning on the PALS changes and on PPE. As a kind of reassurance, I guess, we had a good discussion on each of those at QGC. The one thing that has changed, and this is a statement of fact, not a complaint, is that we were given a heads up that PALS was going to be challenging, but the specific proposal on the 60 days we didn't discuss because it hadn't been made at the time, but we've had a good discussion on that now. So I just wanted to be clear that we'd been giving that some due challenge in the committee. That was all. Thank you. Any questions for Stuart on the Quality Governance Committee record of business?
Well, it's not a question, it's just enhancing what Stuart just described about the hospital handover process. I've raised this nationally as well through Association of Ambulance Chief Executives, and we also did that with our commissioning group or commissioners as well. Accepting and recognising that it's a good piece of work, but it, at this stage, doesn't go far enough. So we've made that sort of formal, our position formal.
Through Ed?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Will, I think you've got your hand up, Will Legg.
Yeah, my point, Pauline, was just a quick one on the handover delays and the point around ICS going forward. I think the session that we're going to have later on in our board development session on the consultation, which is currently live from NHSIE in terms of the new way of monitoring urgent emergency care, I think is going to help some of that conversation along, Stuart. So it certainly comes into that conversation.
Thank you for that, Will. So we'll take those record of business for assurance. Thank you. We've then got a record of business from the Finance and Performance Committee. Anything to add?
Yes.
Yeah, go on, Mike.
Well, the date of the meeting was co-termed as the distribution of the papers, so you won't have got this paper unless it's distributed separately. So if it's okay, I'll just go through some of the key points, Chair.
Yeah.
So the performance, I think Ben's covered off quite nicely in the first part there. And there's some mitigations that we discussed at the meeting in terms of keeping that performance on track. There's assurance around the financial performance report. We were in surplus against plan. 12 of that. One was the SDP 400,000 surplus. So there was a surplus on COVID expenditure. And we had a good session on estates, on risk registers, and the performance of the new contract, and how that went, and giving much more assurance around things around health and safety in particular. So that was quite well received, and the M put quite a bit of work there. Then a very good presentation on reducing avoidable conveyances in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. Well received by the committee, and a very detailed bit of work in terms of how conveyances are being reduced. Had an update on the efficiency programme and where we're going on that. Then had a briefing on the 21-22 urgent emergency care contract, where we still don't know what the settlement's going to be for next year. It looks likely that Q1 will be a rollover of Q4, and possibly Q2 being a rollover of Q1, but nothing to update further on there. So, and then a bit further down, and then we approved policies on motor insurance rebate and overpayment of salaries, and then looked at a new risk 19, about multiple differential contracts with ICSs and STP. So that's a very brief summary of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And we'll get the record of business at the next Trust Board meeting at the beginning of March. Thanks. Karen, did you want to add anything?
The only point I'd reinforce, Pauline, and we've had a long debate about it, is the avoiding conveyance. The presentation that we had was extremely good, and certainly possibly worth the rest of the board actually seeing the slides, because when you looked at that and from the presentation, you could see very clearly how good the impact had been on specific areas of work. It was very.
Thank you. Perhaps, Ben, could you arrange for those slides to be circulated to board members for information?
I certainly can, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Stuart, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just thought it was worth actually putting on again on the board record, echoing what Mike said in particular around estates work and related matters. As someone who a couple of times in my career at EMAS have chaired estates committee, and we've had a couple of times estates and things like fire risk assessments as quite a high profile for the board. I think the comfort we took from the new arrangements with the, I'll say new, now year-old FM company and the various processes was very reassuring, and I think it's worth putting that on the record. It's really turned around that area, so thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stuart. Karen, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, just to support that. That was an anomaly on my part. Again, a really solid presentation and information coming from the head of estates. Really good.
That's great to hear, because as Stuart said, that is something that has troubled the board in the past. So that's great to hear that that's made good progress and that colleagues feel assured by what they've heard at the meeting. Okay, we'll march straight on then, and we'll take the Workforce Committee record of business next. VJ, did you want to add anything?
Chair, just a couple of things, if I may. I'd like to draw attention to 2 bullet points in the assure section. One is around workforce metrics, and there was a discussion in the meeting around the resumption of the appraisals, and when they do resume, what they would look like, how meaningful they would be, and how they can be discharged in a meaningful way. So Carrie was going to take this up with our exec colleagues, and we'll be hearing more about it. And the final point is on the Freedom to Speak Up report, which was received. I'd like to share with the board that for the first time, we saw some feedback from our colleagues who had initially raised the concern, and on the conclusion of the issue, they actually gave us some feedback, which actually happened to be very positive. And I think that's really good practice, and I commend that to the board, and we'd like to hear more and see more of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, VJ. Kerry, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. The point I wanted to highlight also was around the employee case management report that we received for the first time at the Workforce Committee. And this was as a result of the work we've done in relation to improving people practices that we've previously discussed at the board. So the committee are now receiving a quarterly report on employee case management, employee relations, and that also includes information and data around early resolutions, informal resolutions to matters, and building up any trends and patterns, etc. So I think positive to see that at the Workforce Committee for the first time. It was welcomed by members.
Thank you, Kerry. I actually sat in on the Workforce Committee, and I much appreciated that new report. It's a significant step forward, and it will be great to see any significant issues flagged up to the board in the future through the record of business report. But very well done. It was really good progress to see that. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. We'll take those a record of business for assurance. And then the last in this section is the record of business from the Charitable Fund Board of Trustees. It's short and to the point, Mike. I don't think there's anything to add, is there?
No, absolutely not. No, if you look committees where Ed was there only 4 weeks ago, so it's to be fresh in the minds.
Are any questions from board colleagues or comments? No. Great, thank you. So we'll take those records of business for assurance. I think now actually might be a good point to pause the meeting. Stuart, Richard, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we all join together, we'll take a minute's silence in respect of Pete, who was a technician who previously was based at Chesterfield Ambulance Station. He actually retired in 2013 after serving for some 36 years in the ambulance service. So if we take a minute now, please. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Richard, and our thoughts are with Pete's family today, and I'm sure that that's the same for all his colleagues that are thinking of him and remembering him today. Okay, shall we move straight on then, and we'll go to the governance section of the report now, and of the meeting now, and the first item on the agenda is the health and safety policy, which is coming for approval. And Nicola.
Yes, thank you. So this is due its 2-year review. There's been fairly minimal changes made to the policy, so just to update with job titles and organisational arrangements. It has been widely consulted on. It also went to Quality and Governance Committee on the 19th of January, who recommended approval by the board. So happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Any questions for Nicola on the policy? Gary and then Kerry.
Thanks, Nicola. I think it was 5.5. I think scored out there was the removal of the external NHS review. I just wondered how they will receive their assurance going forward if that review is gone, or whether it's in a different format.
Sorry, could you just point me to the section?
So I think it's 5.5.
Yeah.
And the last part of 5.5 talks about the annual basis of quality and compliance inspectors employed, etc. will audit. If that's audits removed, I wonder how NHS will get their assurance that the process is in place.
I'm not entirely sure. If I'm honest with that question, I probably need to go back to the team and ask that.
Okay.
I mean, health and safety, I'm sure, will be occasionally subject to our own internal audit reporting, but it's something that's been removed by them. So perhaps a question we need to take back to them. How are they assured about our health and safety?
It wasn't a complaint, it was an observation, that's all.
Yeah. No problem.
Can I just also add, Gary, on the back of that, the LSMS team, who obviously reporting to Mike, have national reporting routes around compliance. So we can get a comprehensive answer around what reporting requirements and schedule is in place, and to address this point.
And then can you just circulate that response to board members? Thank you. Kerry.
Thank you, Chairman. Nicola, it's a general point really, and a question around, have we sufficiently covered home working arrangements in the context of health and safety in this policy? I wasn't sure whether we needed just to reflect that in there, because whilst it is a temporary measure, obviously as part of our transformation, we're working toward a more permanent solution around home and agile working. So I just wondered if we needed to reflect that in there somewhere.
Yeah, if you feel it isn't adequately reflected, then we can go back and have a look at that. Obviously, there are other policies that sit behind this where we have made some significant changes in relation to home working. So, for example, things like how we now manage display screen equipment, risk assessments annually, and PAT testing of equipment that's from home. Yeah. So, but yeah, it may be helpful to have a reference to that within this policy.
Thank you.
Just on that point, have we actually got a home working policy?
We will have a home working policy, Chairman. It's currently in draft form and we'll go through the formal governance routes for approval.
Yeah, that would be an opportunity to stress some of the health and safety aspects associated with home working. Great, thank you. I think I saw Will Pope's hand. Will?
Yeah. Thank you, Pauline. Just on that latter point that Kerry raised, I support that as well. I think that is essential to do. And related to that, in another organisation where I'm on the board, they've actually also reviewed insurance for people who are home working, if you like, not voluntarily, but because they have to. And I wonder if we could, I don't mean for now, but if we could also review the insurance position, both for the equipment that may be there, i.e. not on an EMAS site, but also for the people who are working at home. So if I could just throw that one in, Pauline. My actual question was, Nicola, is related to, I'm sorry there are no page numbers on the document, but it's page 42 of the pack. There are 4 dots at the top of page 42, and I'm looking at the deletion of the word adequate in the second dot. And I wonder if that is a good idea to take out that word, because I imagine that it was taken out for very good reasons, but I wonder if without that word, it could be that the information provided could be inadequate.
I'm not sure where you're referring to, Will. Are you sure, Nicola?
Yeah, I think I've found it. Is it that all staff are provided with information, instruction and training?
Yes, that's right. And the word adequate has been struck out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there are issues with what's the definition of adequate.
Why don't we just say appropriate?
Yes, or required.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just, Kerry, have you got, is yours an old hand or a new hand?
Apologies, it was an old hand.
Okay, thanks. Just on that point about home working, Nicola was going to go away and have a look at the policy and see if it was adequately reflected. I don't think we need to see the policy back here again to approve it. Can we leave it to the executive team to review the policy in respect of home working and make appropriate amendments if necessary?
Paul, yeah, if I could have started, there's a significant amount of work for reassurance around home and agile working, which is being undertaken. Indeed, there are some communications going to be shared widely today within the organisation, but we will, as an executive team, continue to monitor that. Okay,
so we'll accept this. Well, we'll approve this policy subject to those amendments, and at the next meeting, perhaps Nicola could report on whether or not those amendments were necessary in terms of home working. Thank you. Straight on then to the governance report from Karen. Again, Karen, assume that we've read it, just draw our attention to any key points, please.
Thank you, Chair. In this report, there are just 2 minor amendments to the scheme of delegation and revised terms of reference for the Charitable Funds Board of Trustees. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Karen on either of those amendments or on either of those issues? No. So we're asked to, just bear with me, approve the proposed amendment to section 16 of the schedule of matters reserved to the Trust Board scheme of delegation. We're approving that. We're approving the amendment to the policies and procedures appendix to the schedule of matters reserved to the Trust Board and scheme of delegation, so that reference is made to patient safety procedures being approved by the Quality and Governance Committee. And we're approving the revised terms of reference for the Charitable Funds Board of Trustees. Thank you. We then move straight on then to the board assurance framework and again to Karen.
Thank you, Chairman. The only thing I want to highlight in this report is the new risk which has been added, risk 19, which relates to the establishment of integrated care systems and other issues that could impact on the way in which we are commissioned and the way in which we receive our income, and the Finance and Governance Committee have considered that risk.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Any questions for Karen on the board assurance framework? I've got one actually, and it's not really for Karen, it's for the risk owner of risk number 8. Just bear with me while I find it. So risk number 8 is
myself.
Richard. Oh, this is a question for you, Richard.
Thank you.
And I just wondered where we are now. Is the likelihood of this risk not a 5? is the likelihood of this risk now moved to, is it almost certain? Is that what number 5 is? On the risk score. You can remind me of this, Karen.
It is. It's almost certain, Chairman.
And I'm just wondering, in terms of where we are with the number of staff that we've seen having to be stood down or removed from duty because of COVID, the number of outbreaks that we've had, I'm just wondering if this risk is now, the likelihood of it is actually almost certain, and we're moving into the risk being rated as a 20 rather than a 16.
Yeah, if I can, Chair, what we'll do is we'll take this away as an executive team and have a further review of the risk. I think the point around how it will manifest around the patient safety of clinical incidents, that hasn't manifested in that way at this stage, which actually is good. But if we'll take that away and
I think,
back to the board.
yeah, and I think I would look broader than that, because it does say may negatively impact on the care provided, and what it is doing is impacting on our response times, because we've got less resources around. That might not necessarily harm patients, but it is having I would argue, having an impact on our ability to respond as we would like to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll review this and report back at the next board meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of the Trust Board in public, which is great. Short and sweet, but I think everybody had an opportunity to ask questions and join in the discussion. So with colleagues' permission, I'll close the meeting and suggest that we take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 10:25 in the confidential section. Don't forget to use that link into the meeting for the confidential section of the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll close the meeting now. We can stop the recording, Karen. Stuart, did you want to say something? No, okay.
I was waving goodbye to those people who I wasn't about to meet in the confidential section.
All right, goodbye to everybody.